So I am Melanie Page, and I'm the new Assistant Vice President for Creative and Scholarly Activities. And one of the things that I've taken on, working in conjunction with Teaching and Learning Commons, is a broader picture of faculty development. And so one of the goals that my office has is for people to kind of take their career to the next level, right? In terms of awards, in terms of research funding. And so one of the things that I have sort of seen through my career, so I went through the tenure and promotion process at Oklahoma State in the psychology department. I'm full professor. One of the things that I've realized is that people don't plan their careers mindfully, right? So typically pre-tenure, our only goal is I must get tenure. And that is the only goal we work for. Then post-tenure, we sort of just fall into paths. And so we were all in a workshop on Friday, and the speaker talked about if you don't have a plan, someone else will use you for their plan. And even if you sort of have a plan for or a goal at the end, you don't know how to get there, right? So I want to be full professor. If you're one of relatively few full professors in your department, you don't know how to get there. And sometimes the other people who get there didn't have a plan either, and they sort of just fell along the way as well. And so we continue this cycle almost of abuse of each other, right? So that there's not anybody sort of saying, okay, let's kind of stop the madness and figure out how are we going to do this in a more efficient way? And how do we keep our best and our brightest throughout their entire careers so that they're not looking elsewhere, that they're really fulfilled in their job here. And so, and we typically don't think of career planning for academics or career mapping. And so when you look this, if you Google this, it's going to be mainly in corporate. So are you looking to go from one corporation to the other? Or it's at the undergraduate level. And so there's a lot of stuff related to kind of picking a major, finding a first career sort of thing when you think about career planning or mapping. And there really isn't anything. And we tend as academics to not even think we have a career, right? It's just sort of a calling, it's a vocation. We don't actually think of it as an actual career, mainly because as a faculty member, you don't really identify that you have a boss. At least I didn't. Yes, I have a department chair or a department head, and yes, there's a dean somewhere out there. But they're not your real day-to-day boss, right, where they could come in and fire you because you're late. And so it's a very different it's a very different way to think about a career, right? You really do have a career. We tend to be encouraged to love the entity we work for, right? So there's a lot of marketing around school spirit. And so the entity becomes more than the thing that gives you your paycheck, right? Versus, IBM does not have football games to go to, and there's no, anti-IBM to root for and against, and so it's a very different type of career and a very different emotional context we find ourselves in. And so what I just kind of want to put on this is that it really is a career. There really is a paycheck involved. There really is work hours involved that should be limited in some fashion. And that our goal should be beyond, I want to get tenure or I want to get full professor, if you really want to be fulfilled in your career. And so today's seminar is the first time I've ever given it, so you're my guinea pigs. And so we're going to see how it works. So I realized that probably a better title for academics would have been Strategic Career Planning for Academics, Bring Back the Fun. And then I think people might have gotten it that, hey, wait, this is really for me. And I found this little quote, my career plans were much more exciting when I was 5. Right? There was every possibility open to you. And what I really liked about Friday's seminar, the morning session was about sort of, if you're at this associate level, what's the next thing, is this idea of possibilities. Okay? That there's no one right track. And so kind of a couple of rules for today as we're working through some stuff, and it's going to be very hands-on. One is we're going to turn off our inner critic. Okay? So Dr. Rockamore talked a lot about we have these switches in our head. Well, we don't literally have switches in our head. She was not unscientific. She was not scientifically illiterate. But if we had switches in our head, right, let's turn off the inner critic. And then let's turn off the strongest outer critic, right? So whoever is the person in your life, when every time you have an idea, they're right here with why it can't work. And I used to do that. My husband would have a lot of business ideas, and I would be right there, right? My researcher said, oh, this, blah, blah, blah. And finally he said, can you just once, wait 5 minutes, just once say, wow, that's a great idea. And I said, you know what, I could, right? Why do I have to be the one, particularly if I'm trying to be a supportive person, right? Why do I have to be the one that brings on reality? Now, if we're going to go to the next step and it's going to cost $100,000, right, or I got to mortgage my house, then, reality can set in. But for most people, right, the negative person in our life really doesn't actually have a stake in our success. And so really thinking through the types of people we surround ourselves with and recognizing those people. I was in another leadership seminar in which we talked, there was a person that was interacting with a person like this who was always negative, who was always, you can't possibly do that, it won't possibly work. And I said, do you direct report to this person, right? Are they your department chair? No, they are not. Are you forced in any other way, right, into a situation with a person? You're co-teaching, you run a law clinic together? No. And I said, don't talk to the person, right? Do not engage with them, right? So if this is the person, and if this is a family member, right? Our phones identify who's calling. Limit it, right? You don't need to hear that every day, okay? Once a month. Okay? You're very busy. Your life is very busy. Texting is a fabulous invention now for that, right? Stay in touch without having to participate in those relationships. So that's sort of the first piece of this, is to eliminate the limitations you put on yourself and the limitations others are putting on you. Okay? Second rule of today is we're going to be doing our work on blank pieces of paper. Okay? Will is very lawyerish. He has his lined paper. You can take notes on the lined paper, okay, but you can't do your work on the lined paper. Okay? Your brain will work differently with a blank piece of paper than it does with a lined piece of paper. A lined piece of paper forces us into linear thinking. Okay? It makes us write in a straight line and from left to right. Okay? There is nothing that says we must write from left to right in a straight line. You can actually write in circles. You could write backwards if you're talented. You can write from top to bottom, bottom to top. You can draw pictures. Okay? Our other rule is that your entire work today cannot be in black or blue pen. Okay? Hence, we have colored pencils. And so you have to at least use one extra color at some point on your work. Okay? Your work is for you. Okay? It's not turned in at the end. You don't have to show it to anybody. So you can be artistic. You can be silly. You can be free. You can doodle. This is really just sort of a tool for you to begin thinking. Okay? And so I have a handout of the second page of my presentation. And one of the things that I'm trying to do within my presentations is really move away from PowerPoint, right? So there's PowerPoint backlash of, and so when I use PowerPoints, I use a lot of visuals instead of words. And the visuals just sort of cue me into kind of what we're doing. So you can see we have sort of two things going on here. One is kind of the roadmap, right? You are here. And it makes it really easy because you're both in the same space. So you're in the same here, right? So we don't have people from graduate school all the way through full professors, and what do I do now? So you are here, you're some point on your career map. Okay? And if you look at the career planning up above, right, this is a circle because it's sort of continual reinvention. But the first place we're going to start is knowing yourself. Okay, and so I want you to take a new blank piece of paper, okay, and we're going to take maybe 5 minutes here, okay, and brainstorm, okay, with no limitations. Nobody's going to see this. Brainstorm on what Dr. Rockamore calls your zone of genius, okay, your zone of optimal development, what you are super fabulous at. Okay. There's no judgment, right? I'm not going to come over and say, no, you're actually not super fabulous at that. Your Uncle Pete is not going to come over and say you're not super fabulous at that. So it's whatever you are super fabulous at. where are you energized, right? So when you're thinking about your day-to-day work life, where do you find your energy? What sort of feeds your inner academic person? We're going to combine them eventually. Okay? Next page, okay, and it kills me to actually use a new page, right, not the backside. But we're going to need to see them all simultaneously together. The next page, I want you to explore your options, right? Again, all options are on the table. Okay? Obviously, ideally, I hope you stay here at WVU and you have a very productive career. Okay? But open up the possibilities that maybe the career that you need to go to is somewhere else. Okay? So don't lock yourself into, I must stay in this one career trajectory that I have set for myself. So if you were thinking now through all of the possibilities that you have open to you, okay, and then think about your sort of zone of genius, what really energizes you, and map those two together now. Okay. And what we're eventually going to, and you can have several now on your third paper, so you don't have to pick one yet. Okay, we're eventually going to pick one to work a little bit more towards. So have at least one on your third piece of paper.
So wait, you want us to map?
So I want you to put those two together. So if you're, so for me, my zone of proximal development would be classroom teaching and then big strategic thinking with an ability to basically micromanage the plan in terms of coming up with the little steps. So I can do the little steps and the big steps. And so so that would be my zone of proximal development. Those are the things that make me really excited. And so at the point that I was an associate professor, I really wanted to begin the move into administration. I thought, okay, I want to use sort of my second skill set. And I applied for an internal position and I didn't get an interview. And so I talked to somebody on that search committee. And they said, well, your problem is you're not full professor, right? That you won't be competitive for upper level administration until you're full professor. And I said, okay, then I will go back and be that. And so my goal in being full professor was actually to get to administration. So I wasn't actually very mindful about it, and I was just going to do it as fast as possible. And so I just kind of looked at, okay, what are our departmental guidelines? Okay, I need this many publications. I can do it in this many years. 5 is the minimum you have to wait. However, if you go up in your 5th year, where I was at, you're sort of viewed as early, and people will view your file more harshly. So I had a conversation with my colleague at the time, and I said, well, you look at my vita. And he said, well, I had a book that was going to come out the next year, and he said, wait until the book is out. And you can actually hand copies of the book to the external reviewers rather than the PDF proofs. And so it could partially have been bribery, right? Social psychology, if I give you something small, you'll give me something large, so here's a free book. No. But so that's why I set my trajectory towards full professor. And then obviously continued to teach, and then tried to just pick up a little bit along the way some administrative experiences. I was a program coordinator for our graduate program. But it was really ultimately then to lead me to the final goal of upper administration. And so, thinking about in terms of at a different school, I could have immediately gone into administration at a smaller school. So at the point where I was in sort of this zone of proximal development and what's the next step, right? If I had been willing or able to move at that point in my career, I could have gone and been a department chair or dean, associate dean at a smaller school, but not within the school that I was at. And so I just had to get full professor first. And so that's sort of that sort of meshing of the two. So, this is my zone, my proximal development is I'm an outstanding scholar, okay? And, eventually I want to be dean. Okay, what are the steps along the way? Or
do you want us to put out the steps now?
So no, just now, sort of what's your final end goal that matches now with your zone of proximal development. So, if your zone, for me, my zone of proximal development is not being a sole PI researcher, but I'm a very good collaborator, right? I'm a statistician. And so part of the way that I got to full professor was big collaborative teams. And so being an integral part of big collaborative teams that had lots of funding, they helped them get lots of funding. But a working statistician who will work on multiple teams is an asset at most universities, and so it's very easy to find collaborations. But I don't like the intro, and I don't like the discussion. I love the methods and the results section, and so I had to recognize it about myself, right? What are my limitations as a scholar? And that's my limitation as a scholar. I don't like to do the big thinking of the scholarship. I don't like to do the intro writing. I'm a very good editor, and so I'm a very good co-author, and then I can easily write a method and results section. And help think about ramifications. I just don't like to write about them. And I have colleagues that have research teams with who love the front part and the end part. They don't like the middle part. And so sort of finding the other person who has that matching skill set, right, to you. Particularly because post-tenure, you don't have to do everything anymore, right? And that was a big point that Carrie Ann Rockmore was making, is that now is the point at which you get to choose more. If we assert ourselves and have a plan, right? If we don't, then we just sort of keep saying yes to whatever comes along that sort of seems like it would be good. Relative to taking it back to what's our plan, and there's going to be some things we say yes to, right, just because of who asks us. But there'll be other things we'll be able to say. We've said yes to that person's thing over here. Now when the person comes back, we can say, person, I said yes to this over here, and this new one you're asking me does not actually map onto my plan. I think they would, and I think it helps when you have it written down, right? And you can document the things that you did as a good team player and a good institutional member, and that gives you then the social capital, right, that you need to be able to say no to the next thing that comes on, and to show them, this is how this does not map onto my long-term plan, and my long-term plan is to stay here and be successful, right? If your long-term plan is to go off on your own and you're using them for the expense of that happening, right, that's probably not something you want in writing and up front. They wouldn't be supportive of that. And sometimes they would though, right? So in administration, it's fairly recognized that if you want an administrative position, you will leave the institution. Right? I think it's a very poor business model, right? So Oklahoma State invested a lot in me. I went to a lot of leadership training, both on and off campus, and WVU is benefiting. And so it's a very poor business model. So if your ultimate goal is to be something that we don't have here, create it, right? So I would never have suspected that this job that I have right now would ever have existed, right? For me, it's the perfect job. It involves faculty development. It involves mentoring of junior faculty. It involves big strategic thinking and small implementation planning. Right? I couldn't have written a better job ad for myself. And so, and it's quite actually common in corporate where these really brilliant, smart people actually write their own job, right? Because the company wants to keep them. Okay? So if we have some people here, right, and I think particularly with this leadership that's in place, there's no reason to suggest you can't actually write your own job ad as a whatever, right? So why is our administrative structure always dean, associate dean for research, associate dean for graduate studies, associate dean for undergraduate, so it's the same sort of structure, right? Why can't someone envision something completely radically different? But there are certain things which could be much better solved if there weren't departments, right? And there was, Arizona State did this within the School of Engineering. They took on grand challenges, and so they reorganized all of the departments around grand challenges. So while students can actually still get a degree in like chemical engineering, and there's an official sort of chemical engineering, they're really not organized by departments anymore. They're organized by these grand challenges. And so, access to clean water is obviously a big problem in the desert. So watershed problem in the desert. So they might have chemical engineers, bioengineers, some structural engineers, the civil engineers are all now part of this grand challenge team, and they no longer function in a departmental way. And so, Was it hard for the people that had come from a very traditional background? Sure was. Were there people that left? Sure were. But the people who stayed are invested in that model. Well, and I think that part of that is putting together strategic teams, right? And thinking about who are your allies, and starting small. So a small demonstration of how that could work with a course, right? So let's show it with a course, right? That we can team teach a course with 4 people from 4 diverse fields. And not only did nobody die at the end of it, right? The consumers, our customers, the students were incredibly happy with the way that it was done. If it's a mindful, planful experiment, and the people that are doing it are invested. And then, ultimately you would hope that a place like this could be nimble enough to think about doing things differently, but sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes you have to go to smaller places. So some of the really innovative things in course scheduling are being done at really small schools. And so there's a couple schools who've recently opened their all-you-can-eat dining halls till midnight, right? Students don't eat dinner between 5 and 6:30. They eat dinner between 10 and 10:30 or, at midnight. And so they've actually opened the dining hall, 2 of their dining halls on campus till midnight. Okay? That's really cool, right? They're scheduling classes at 10 o'clock at night. Okay? And some of the faculty want to teach then. Most of them don't, right? Particularly as you get kids who go to school. But there are some people.
I go for that, right after my daughter goes to sleep, I feel like I could teach.
Right.
Yeah. Or, so that would actually work for some people, that they would actually prefer to not teach at 8 o'clock in the morning. They prefer to teach at 11 o'clock at night. And so these kind of crazy innovative models. Or in smaller schools, there's often not departments because there simply aren't enough faculty to have departments, right? So you might have a social sciences group that has anthropologists, psychologists, sociologists, social workers, geographers, political scientists, because there's only 1 or 2 of them, right? You're not going to have a department of 2 people. And so that allows you to have very different models than when you're really big. I think the biggest mistake we make is when we build new buildings, giving whole floors to departments. So if I was a dean, I would interchange people continually. And so I don't ever think a floor should go to a department. I think it's a missed opportunity for collaboration. So what we want to sort of look at is picking your option. Okay, so the one option that you're going to spend sort of the rest of the time on, and we have about 15 minutes left, is what do you actually need to do to get there? Okay, so if it's full professor, okay, that's why I was actually hoping the tenure and guidelines were in here. I was going to see if, okay, what does law say? Only because we have 2 people from law school here. What does law say about becoming full professor? Right? Is it national or international reputation? Is it number of scholarly papers? Is it a certain level of teaching? And where are you sort of missing? Okay? And what level of full professor do you want to be, right? Do you want to be kind of I'm going to be nervous putting my portfolio forward, or do you want to be, you rocked it out of the park, right? And where do you need to put your energy to rock it out of the park? Okay, so if scholarship comes pretty easily to you and you knock 2 things out in the summer or over the year, and that's not really where you have to put your energy, but you need to put energy in teaching, put energy in teaching. Teaching comes really easy for you, that's kind of a no-brainer. You can put it on automatic pilot, okay? And you really need to think about scholarship. Okay, what kind of support do you need? If you're currently super engaged in service, right, map your service to your goal. Okay, so have your service list, have your goal list. Everything that is not directly related gets highlighted. Okay. If it is very easy to step away, you send somebody an email that says, I participated in a career mapping seminar. I have mapped my service activities to my long-term career goals. And at this time, this opportunity is not advancing my career. Thank you very much. But I won't be able to do this anymore. Melanie Page said so. I used to use my department chair a lot. I would say, yeah, I'd love to do that, but Maureen won't let me. And she even said to do that, right? That I had too much service. And she's like, just tell them I won't let you. So sometimes having the higher level fall guy, bad guy is a good thing. But it's actually true, right? I think in the newer faculty seminar, I believe it was actually the provost who said this, every new opportunity that comes your way, you make no response immediately other than a thank you. I will need to think about how this relates to my career goals. Okay? And you take 24 hours and you think about it. Okay? Unless it's like the perfect opportunity and it's the thing that you've been waiting for somebody to ask you to do. If you don't have anything on your list that is the thing that you've been waiting for someone to ask you to do, create it, right? Make it up, propose a task force, propose a working group, propose a strategic group to look at doing X differently, right? I want to be able to do X in this way. I will take the lead on this, right? And I will put together your own team. If you're going to take a lead on something, put together your own team. Okay? And put together only sane people, okay, who don't want drama and who do the work. So if you put together your own team, that really helps eliminate that, right? And then, put a 6 month to 1 year sort of timeline on that. At the end of 6 months or a year, we're going to have small working document that we can then take to the next level, right? If the next level doesn't listen to you, you always have that work, right, to show for other opportunities. And particularly if it's something that you can actually implement on your own and you really don't need other people to approve that. So I went to a leadership thing. I decided, okay, I want to be full professor. And they made us do this, right? List out all of our activities. One of the things that I did that I was very passionate about, I was the pre-med advisor for psychology. So I had been pre-med myself. My husband's a biomedical engineer. And so I felt like I'm very passionate about medical education and what sort of doctors we should be training. And so I was a pre-med advisor. I'd meet with the students. I'd participate in the interviews in the spring. They do mock board interviews. I'd write the letters for all the psychology students. And I loved it. But it was doing nothing to get me to full professor, right? Typical to many people at the institution, I did not need one more service thing, right? I think there's been times that my vita has been like half service. And I didn't need anything. And so I stepped away in the middle of a semester. I stepped away in February and said, I simply can no longer do this. It is impeding my success. And from being able to, I would have been the first woman full professor in the department since 1970. And so there really was a reason for the institution to support that. And so, I never even followed up to see if we replaced me, right? So I didn't want to know. Like, if we didn't replace me, I'm not the department chair. That's not my problem. And we tend to take on everybody else's problem as our own and want to solve it for them. But it's not our problem. That's not what we're paid to do. And so the bigger picture issues you can put aside. And so being psych club advisor was the same thing. Now I waited till the end of the semester to give that to a colleague. But then it allowed a colleague, right, who didn't interact with students as much to have a set way to interact with them. So they weren't as comfortable with mentoring relationships, and it allowed them, and they did some really fun things. Like this person loved bowling, so they started a bowling league for the psychology students. And so it was a lot of fun. The graduate students and the professors would go and play the undergraduates, and you got to know people at a different level. And they're still bowling, like 7 years later. So you never know what opportunities you're opening up for other people, right? So don't always view it as a bad thing that you're stepping back. Tie what you're doing to your workload document. So when I first got here and I heard about these workload documents, I was like, that's kind of weird. Right? Grew up in a system that didn't have workload documents. So every year you should have a document that says what percentage of your time is supposed to be teaching, what time is supposed to be research. make sure those actually match what you're doing, right? So if your workload document says 20% service, but you time map yourself for a week and 50% of your time is in service, there's a problem, right? One of those two things has to match. Okay? If you love all the service and you're absolutely vital to the world happening, change it, get that workload document changed, right? Go back and document. As a statistician, I'm a huge believer in data. So time track yourself for a week, right? And this was something that Dr. Rockamore suggested as well. You cannot know where your money goes. You cannot know where your time goes, right? And in academia, our time is money, and money is time. And so you absolutely have to know. And certainly my lawyer colleagues here know, you have to know where every second goes, right? So their current lawyer regarding our house, right? I don't respond back to emails to say thank you because that costs me money, right? It costs me part of the $150 an hour fee. So you feel very rude, but it's not necessary, and he doesn't need me to say thank you, right? So finding those little time sinks in our day, not that we want to be rude to all our colleagues and not say thank you, right? But sort of thinking about, are we doing other things that keep us from doing that? If within, and I'm just going to use full professor, if within your plan you want to be a full professor, but you want to be a full professor sort of to the nth degree because you want to win the such and such award that nobody else in your department has ever won, and or it's very meaningful to you to win this award, right? Figure out what the criteria for that award are. And one of the things that I can do for people, if they're not comfortable, right, contacting previous award winners, because it feels kind of weird to say, hey, I want to win this award, what'd you do? Feels self-promoting. One of the things that I've done for people is actually contacted previous winners to say, hey, I have a faculty member that I'm working with who's really interested in this award. What did you do to get there? Right? And some people were kind of like, well, I just did my life. But other people were very helpful in terms of, really they focused on one particular area versus broadly looking at their career. And that would help a person set up their scholarship, right? Like right now you have 3 areas, but that's too diverse, that's too spread out. You should really focus on the one area, right? Or, you're helping on 6 different service projects, but you really need to concentrate on project A because you have to show, a big, huge contribution, okay? And that's another way to sort of think about your service, right? And pitching, being involved on lesser committees, but to a higher degree, right? So that if you're involved in a lot of things, you can't give as much as you could if you led 2, okay? And so thinking about and selling it as my skill set is a leadership skill set. Therefore, person that I'm negotiating with to get off these other committees, we're sort of wasting my talents over here. If you put me over here as a leader or co-leader, I can really help move this initiative forward. And then backing that up, right, with the output that happens quickly. And sort of thinking through, and oftentimes it's good to do that with something you've already thought a lot about, right, because you're halfway there. And so, sort of now thinking through and not feeling bad that you're going to take 24 hours and go back to the plan. Okay? And you're going to think about, and it may change, right? So now you're on trajectory, I'm going to be super full professor, and then you have a baby, or a parent gets sick, okay? Or you get sick, right? Okay, either extend the timeline, right? So if you still want to be super professor, extend your timeline. Or decide, come back a little bit and say, okay, you know what, for this point, I'm just going to be regular full professor. And then when my life sort of evens out again, then I'm going to go be super. Okay? So as long as something's not limited by only associate professors can get this award, right? And so it doesn't matter when you are in your career to get this award. Okay? Or you have to be only 10 years post-degree to get this staff award. Okay? Then we put artificial timelines on ourselves, probably because we're mortal beings. But if you think and you plan for at least a 100-year lifespan, I always plan for a 100-year lifespan, then if you're at year 40, right, if you're somewhere between 40 and 50, you actually have a lot of time left. Okay? And so our time crushing is put on by ourselves, right, and by a society. So if we look at European societies, right, and the way that they treat time, it's very different than the way Americans treat time. And so kind of thinking outside of our own cultural box of the way we've been raised with time. And integrating that then career with life and the things that come up. And so, you know, being, again, I think it goes back to what Dr. Rockamore was saying, is that someone else will use you for their goals, and not in a malicious way, right? Nobody's like, ha ha, I will use my minions to further my own career. But really, just because you're there and you're allowing them to. And so really think about where you want to go. And it's still sort of at the end of the process of thinking about where you want to go. You now know where you want to go, but you still don't know the pieces to get there. I'm happy to actually sit with people on an individual basis. Because I know there's some questions that people might want to ask that we wouldn't ask on camera. And I appreciate you guys being very good sports to be on the camera one. And I'd like the camera to know they've been very cooperative. Their papers are colorful and artful. So are there any sort of general questions that people want to ask before we turn off the camera, and then if there are specific questions?
No, but this has been great. Thank
Has
you.
been helpful? Okay.
Very helpful. Hope I said that loud enough for the camera to pick up, because it was awesome.
Well, thank you.